The bridge of the superstar destroyer Executor was a temple of silence and sterile geometry. 19 kilometers of durasteel, thousands of turbolaser batteries, and a crew population that exceeded that of many developed planets. It was the apex of the Galactic Empire's philosophy: order through fear. Here, officers in crisp gray uniforms worked in sunken pits, their movements efficient and devoid of emotion. The only sound was the low, rhythmic hum of the life support systems and the terrifying, mechanical respiration of the dark figure standing at the viewport. Darth Vader stared into the abyss of the outer rim. The Force here was usually quiet, almost dead, a backwater of smugglers and dust. But today the Force was not quiet. It was screaming. "Lord Vader," Admiral Valorous spoke, his voice steady but laced with a tremor of confusion. "Long-range scanners are registering a gravitational anomaly in Sector 7G. It is inconsistent with hyperspace physics." Vader slowly turned his helmet. The obsidian lenses gleamed under the bridge lights. He had felt it before the sensors did. It wasn't just a disturbance, it felt like a wound. The Force wasn't being manipulated, it was being repelled. It tasted like copper and old blood. It felt like a cold wind blowing from an open grave. "Put it on the main screen," his bass voice rumbled, vibrating in the chests of the crewmen nearby. The starfield on the display shifted. The space ahead was not stretching into the familiar blue lines of hyperspace. It was bruising. The fabric of reality was tearing open, bleeding colors that the human eye struggled to process. Sickly purples, necrotic greens, and the red of arterial spray. "Readings are off the charts," a navigation officer cried out, panic cracking his composure. "It's not a wormhole. It's a rupture in real space." The rift widened, resembling a weeping sore in the universe, and from the swirling madness, a ship emerged. If the Imperial fleet was the embodiment of sleek, technological superiority, clean lines, white armor, symmetry, this vessel was a monument to insanity. It was a flying cathedral, a Gothic nightmare encased in kilometers of rusted, pitted armor. It was shaped like a dagger, but its hull was adorned with gargoyles, screaming statues, and massive chains. Towers rose from its spine like church spires, and its engines vomited thick, black, oily smoke into the vacuum of space, defying all logic of vacuum propulsion. It was smaller than the Executor, perhaps a light cruiser by Imperial standards, but its presence was suffocating. On its prow, a massive symbol burned in heraldic colors, a black Maltese cross on a white field. "Unidentified vessel," Admiral Valorous barked, recovering his arrogance. "You have entered Imperial space. Power down your engines and prepare for inspection, or you will be destroyed." Static hissed over the comms channel. Then a sound filled the bridge of the Executor. It was not a voice. It was a chant. Thousands of voices screaming in unison, accompanied by the grinding of industrial gears. "Imperator Vault. Mort AI Xenos. Imperator Vault. They are hailing us on an unsecured analog frequency, sir," the comms officer reported, grimacing at the noise. "Audio only. Put it through." The voice that spoke was deep, distorted by a voxcaster, and sounded like grinding stones. "This is Marshal Amalrich of the Black Templars, commanding the strike cruiser, Sword of Dorn. You speak the low Gothic tongue, yet your soul reeks of the warpless void. Identify yourself, heretic." Valorous bristled. "I am Admiral Valorous of the Galactic Empire. You are in the presence of Lord Vader. You will surrender immediately." A harsh, metallic laugh erupted from the speakers. "Empire? There is only one Imperium, and it is forged in the light of the God Emperor. Your vessel is an abomination of silica animus. Your souls are dim. You are unclean. Target their engines," Vader ordered, his hand clenching into a fist. He sensed no fear from the stranger. Only a wall of white-hot, fanatical fury that the Force could not penetrate. "We will purge this galaxy of your weakness," the voice roared. "No pity. No remorse. No fear." The Gothic ship didn't try to run. It didn't raise shields. Instead, the massive church-like prow flared with retro thrusters, and the ship accelerated, not away from the Executor but directly toward it. "Sir. They are accelerating to ramming speed. Open fire." Valorous screamed. The Executor unleashed hell. Green turbolaser bolts, capable of vaporizing asteroids, slammed into the intruder. But instead of shimmering particle shields, The green fire struck something else, shimmering, multi-layered void shields that crackled with the energy of a different dimension. The ship shuddered but kept coming. Launch TIE fighters. Intercept them. But as the TIEs swarmed out, the Gothic ship opened its own hangars. No fighters came out. Instead, massive clawed torpedoes, assault rams shot forth. They weren't aiming for the engines. They were aiming for the hull. "They aren't trying to destroy us, my lord," Vader said, igniting his lightsaber as the proximity alarms began to wail. "They are boarding us." With a deafening crunch that vibrated through 19 kilometers of hull, the Sword of Dorn slammed its boarding torpedoes into the pristine white flank of the Executor. The infection had begun. Containment teams to Deck 42. Sector 7 is breached. Captain Rex, not the clone, but a stormtrooper captain named in honor of the ancient legends, adjusted his E-11 blaster rifle. The corridor was white, pristine and perfectly lit. Behind him stood 50 of the 501st Legion's finest, the Vader's Fist. They had pacified planets, crushed rebellions and faced Wookiees. A boarding party from a rust bucket ship didn't scare them. "Set blasters to kill," Rex ordered. "Whatever comes out of those pods, we put it down." At the end of the corridor, the blast doors had been melted through. Not by a laser cutter but by something that looked like acid and brute force. Through the smoke, the boarding torpedo, a rusted, ugly metal pod shaped like a drill, sat embedded in the deck. The ramp hissed open. Fire. 50 blaster rifles erupted in red plasma. The bolts struck the opening, filling it with smoke. Rex waited for the screams. There were none. From the smoke, figures emerged. They were human but raw. They wore rags and flak armor that looked like it belonged in a museum. Their skin was tattooed with script, and some had their eyes replaced with glowing red optics. They carried projectile weapons, solid slug throwers and shotguns, that looked primitive. "For the Emperor!" the ragtag mob screamed, charging directly into the plasma fire. "They're insane!" a stormtrooper yelled, dropping one of the attackers. The intruder laughed as he died, clutching a grenade. "Hold the line," Rex commanded. The stormtroopers were disciplined. Their accuracy was lethal. The wave of cultists, ship serfs, Rex realized, was being cut down. It was a slaughter. The primitive bullets sparked harmlessly off the white plastoid armor of the stormtroopers. "Is that all?" a trooper scoffed, kicking a dead serf away. They brought guns to a blaster fight. Then the heavy thud of boots echoed from the pod. The air temperature in the corridor dropped. A smell of incense and ozone washed over the stormtroopers. From the darkness of the boarding pod, 3 giants stepped out. They were 8 feet tall, encased in black power armor that made them look like walking tanks. The armor was adorned with purity seals, parchment held by wax, and white chains. Their helmets were fashioned to look like snarling knights. In their hands they didn't hold blasters. They held massive roaring chainswords and bulky box-like bolters. "Identified," Rex shouted, his voice wavering for the first time. "Heavy infantry. Focus fire." The stormtroopers unleashed a volley of plasma. The red bolt struck the black armor and dissipated. The ceramite plating merely scorched. The giants didn't even flinch. The lead giant, a space marine initiate of the Black Templars, raised his bolter. "Purge the unclean," his vox grill boomed. He pulled the trigger. The sound was not a pew-pew of a blaster. It was a thunderclap. A .75 caliber rocket-propelled grenade left the barrel. It struck the stormtrooper next to Rex in the chest. There was no wound. The trooper simply exploded. White armor, flesh, and bone were vaporized in a mist of red. Rex froze. He had seen death. He had seen war. But he had never seen a weapon that turned a man into liquid with a single shot. "Fall back," Rex screamed. "Fall BA." The giants charged. They moved with a speed that defied their size. The lead marine activated his chains word. The monomolecular teeth revved to a screaming pitch. He swung the weapon. It didn't just cut, it chewed. It tore through the stormtrooper sergeant, armor and all, splitting him from shoulder to hip in a spray of sparks and gore. The white corridor was instantly painted red. "Grenades. Use the thermal detonators." Rex pulled a pin and threw it. The explosion engulfed the Black Templar. Smoke filled the hallway. "Did we get him?" From the fire, the giant emerged, his armor blackened but intact. He strode forward, grabbing a stormtrooper by the head with one hand. With a sickening crunch, he crushed the helmet like an eggshell. "Your armor is paper," the Marine growled. "Your weapons are flashlights. You are weak." Panic, a raw and unfamiliar emotion, seized the 501st. They were the best soldiers in the galaxy. But they were fighting demigods of war bred in a universe where physics was a suggestion and hate was a fuel source. "Retreat to the secondary blast doors," Rex yelled, firing blindly. "Alert Lord Vader. We can't stop them. We can't stop them." Behind them, the slaughter continued. The Black Templars were not taking prisoners. They were efficient, brutal, and silent save for the roar of their weapons. They were securing a beachhead. And behind them, moving like a spider made of metal and flesh, a tech marine crawled out of the pod, plugging a data spike into the executor's wall panel. "Abominable intelligence detected," the tech marine binary chanted. "The machine spirit of this vessel is enslaved. I shall liberate it." The lights in the corridor flickered and turned red. The executor itself began to scream. Admiral Valorous was not a man prone to sweating, but as he stood on the command deck of the executor, he felt a cold bead of perspiration trace a line down his spine. The bridge, usually a symphony of silent efficiency, had descended into chaos. "Primary fire control is offline," a lieutenant shouted, his voice cracking. "The targeting computers aren't responding to inputs. They're locked out. Override it manually." Valorous barked. "Get the blast doors sealed on deck 42 through 50. Vent the atmosphere. Suck them into space." "I can't, sir." The ops officer turned, his face pale. "The system is rejecting my clearance codes. It says I am spiritually unworthy. On the main view screen, the tactical display flickered and died. In its place, a stream of jagged, red binary code began to scroll, faster than any human eye could read. Then a symbol burned itself onto every monitor on the bridge, a cogwheel with a skull inside, half human, half machine. Deep in the bowels of the executor, Tech Marine Brother Kalen of the Black Templars did not type on a keyboard. He did not slice terminals. He stood before a exposed data junction, his mechadendrites, metal tentacles tipped with drills and data spikes, plunged deep into the ship's circuitry. He was not hacking the ship. He was torturing it. To Kalen, the executor was a tragedy. It was a machine of godlike power, enslaved by a soulless AI, devoid of prayer or sanctity. He could feel the ship's machine spirit, a primitive, confused consciousness, screaming in the darkness. "Be silent, abominable intelligence," Kalen rasped in binary cant. "I bring you the light of Mars. I bring you the purity of the motive force." A squad of Imperial mouse droids skittered past. Kalen's servo-arm lashed out, crushing one instantly. To him, these autonomous robots were the highest heresy, machines that thought for themselves without a biological component. "Purge the silica animus," he intoned. He sent a scrap code virus into the executor's life support grid. Suddenly, the gravity in Sector 7 reversed. Stormtroopers who had been setting up an E-Web heavy repeating blaster were suddenly hurled violently towards the ceiling. Their necks snapped on impact. The Black Templars, their magnetic boots clamped firmly to the deck, marched forward upside down, firing their bolters into the disoriented enemy. The Empire tried to escalate. From the lift tubes, the heavy thuds of AT-ST walkers echoed. The two-legged scout walkers stepped into the wide corridor, their laser cannons spinning up to massacre the boarders. "Armor!" a stormtrooper commander yelled. "Blast them!" The AT-ST fired. Red lasers splashed against the Terminator's armor, leaving glowing craters but failing to penetrate the thick ceramite. Brother Sergeant Tancred laughed, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. He raised a multi-melta, a weapon designed to melt through bunker walls. "Target confirmed," Tancred growled. A beam of superheated thermal energy erupted from the weapon. It didn't explode, it simply erased matter. The cockpit of the lead AT-ST vanished. The metal turned to liquid slag instantly, boiling the pilots inside before they could even scream. The walker collapsed, a headless heap of molten ruin. The stormtroopers broke. They had been trained to fight rebels with stolen rifles, not transhuman tanks that turned their heaviest support units into puddles. But the true horror was just beginning. The executor itself began to turn on its crew. Blast doors slammed shut on officers, cutting them in half. Turbolifts entered freefall. The lights in the hallways died, replaced by the flickering red strobe of emergency alarms, making the approaching Space Marines look like stop-motion monsters from a nightmare. Admiral Valorous watched his command crumbling. "Sir," he whispered to the dark figure standing motionless at the viewport, "we are losing the ship. The computer, it's chanting." Darth Vader turned. The air around him grew heavy, crushing the throat of every officer on the bridge. "The computer is irrelevant, Admiral," Vader said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Technological terrors are insignificant next to the power of the Force. Prepare my shuttle. And alert the 501st to fall back to the main hangar." Vader ignited his lightsaber. The crimson blade hummed, a sound of pure, controlled malice. "I will deal with these guests myself." The remnants of the 501st Legion, the finest soldiers in the galaxy, formed a defensive semicircle. They were terrified. They had seen their brothers turned into red mist. They had seen their weapons fail. Darth Vader stood alone, his black cape billowing in the artificial wind of the venting atmosphere. He did not raise his weapon. He simply waited. The blast doors at the far end of the hangar groaned. Metal shrieked as it was torn apart like wet paper. Through the breach, the Black Templars poured in. But these were not the tactical squads. This was the command squad. Leading them was a figure of terrifying majesty. He wore armor the color of midnight, draped in tabards of cream cloth covered in handwritten scriptures. On his helmet was a skull-faced mask, the visage of the Emperor's judgment. In one hand he held a bolt pistol the size of a stormtrooper's torso. In the other, a Crozius Arcanum, a power maul topped with a golden eagle crackling with a disruptive energy field. This was Chaplain Grimaldus, or a warrior of his equal rank, the spiritual leader of the crusade. The two armies froze. The stormtroopers leveled their blasters. The Space Marines revved their chainswords. Vader stepped forward. The tap-tap-tap of his boots was the only sound in the vast hangar. "You have boarded my ship," Vader announced, his voice amplified by the Force to boom across the hangar. "You have slaughtered my men. You have disrupted the Emperor's peace." The chaplain tilted his head. He looked at Vader not with fear but with curiosity. "Emperor?" The chaplain's voice was a deep baritone, projected through external speakers. "You speak of a false idol. I sense the warp within you, creature. You are a psyker. A witch." "I am a Sith Lord," Vader replied, raising his hand. He reached out with the Force, intending to crush the chaplain's windpipe. It was a move that had killed Jedi Masters and Admirals alike. Vader clenched his fist. Nothing happened. The chaplain didn't gag. He didn't claw at his throat. He simply took a step forward. Vader felt a recoil in the Force. It wasn't that the chaplain was immune to telekinesis. It was that his mind was so singularly focused, so filled with the roaring, white-hot noise of absolute faith, that the Force slid off him like water off oil. It was the armor of contempt. The sheer refusal to acknowledge the power of the enemy. "Your parlor tricks are useless here, witch," the chaplain roared. "I am protected by the shield of hatred. I am the Emperor's wrath made manifest." The chaplain charged. Vader ignited his saber. He moved with the blur of a Force-enhanced predator. He slashed at the chaplain's chest. The lightsaber, a blade of pure plasma contained in a force field, struck the Crozius Arcanum. Crack-boom. The impact created a shockwave that shattered the glass of nearby viewports. The red blade clashed against the golden power field of the Maul. The lightsaber did not cut through. The ancient technology of the Imperium, blessed by the Omnicia and fueled by a fusion reactor on the chaplain's back, held firm. "Impossible," Vader hissed. "Die, heretic." The chaplain swung his maul with the force of a wrecking ball. Vader parried, but the sheer kinetic weight of the blow drove him to one knee. The floor plating buckled under Vader's boots. This was not a duel of finesse. It was a duel of philosophies. Vader used the Force to hurl a TIE fighter at the chaplain. The Space Marine didn't dodge. He simply punched the TIE fighter aside with his power fist, shattering the solar panel wing, and kept coming. "Is this the best your dark gods can give you?" the chaplain mocked, firing his bolt pistol. Vader deflected the explosive shells with his blade, sending them detonating into the walls, but the shrapnel pinged off his own armor. He was being pushed back. For the first time in decades, Darth Vader was on the defensive. He reached deep into the dark side. He drew upon his pain, his loss, his hatred of Obi-Wan, of Palpatine, of himself. The Force swirled around him in a tornado of darkness. "You know nothing of hate," Vader whispered. He unleashed a Force push so powerful it stripped the deck plating from the floor. The chaplain was finally lifted off his feet and hurled backward, smashing into a stack of crates. Vader leaped, closing the distance instantly. He brought his saber down in an execution arc. The chaplain caught the blade on the haft of his Crozius. Sparks showered them both. They were face to mask. "My faith is my shield," the chaplain grunted, straining against Vader's cybernetic strength. "Your faith," Vader said, his voice cold and devoid of mercy, "is blind." Vader didn't try to choke the Marine this time. He focused his mind on the chaplain's fusion pack, the power source of his armor. He used the Force not to crush the man, but to pinch a tiny fuel line inside the reactor. The chaplain's power field flickered. The strength in his armor faltered for a microsecond. In that instant Vader struck. He severed the chaplain's arm at the elbow. The giant roared, not in pain but in fury. He dropped the Crozius but immediately swung his other fist, smashing Vader in the helmet. Vader's mask cracked. The breath mask hissed, struggling to cycle air. Vader stumbled back, his vision glitching. The Marine missing an arm was still standing. He was trying to pick up his weapon with his remaining hand. "No, surrender." The chaplain gurgled, blood leaking from his grill. "The Emperor protects." Vader extended his hand. He didn't crush the Marine's throat. He crushed his heart. Both of them. He felt the organs burst inside the giant's chest. The chaplain fell to his knees. He looked up at Vader, his red optical lenses fading. "You have won the battle?" The Space Marine rasped, his voice turning into a wet cough. "But you have drawn the gaze of the angels of death. We are numberless." The chaplain slumped forward, dead. Vader stood over the corpse, his breathing ragged and loud in the sudden silence. His cape was torn, his armor scorched, his helmet cracked. He looked at his lightsaber, then at the dead giant. The 501st watched in stunned silence. Their lord had won, but he looked like a man who had just wrestled a natural disaster. "Lord Vader," Rex approached cautiously. "The enemy is retreating to their ship. They took what they came for." Vader looked around. The dead chaplain's body was rigged with a dead man's switch. "Run," Vader commanded. The chaplain's armor detonated. A melt-a-bomb explosion consumed the hangar. Vader threw up a Force barrier, shielding himself and the nearest troops, but the blast tore a hole in the side of the Executor. As the smoke cleared, Vader watched through the hull breach. The Gothic cruiser, the Sword of Dorn, was pulling away. It had retrieved its drop pods. It was leaving. They hadn't come to conquer. They had come to test. And as the rift in space opened again to swallow the Black Templars, Vader felt something he hadn't felt since he was a young Jedi named Anakin. He felt the cold shadow of a war that would never end. The silence on the Superstar Destroyer Executor was louder than the battle had been. It was not the disciplined silence of an Imperial bridge. It was the silence of a graveyard. The pride of the Imperial Navy, a vessel capable of glassing continents, was drifting listlessly in the void. Its starboard flank was a jagged ruin of twisted durasteel, venting atmosphere and frozen blood into space. Inside the medical bay, the air smelled of bacta and scorched ozone. Darth Vader lay on a biobed, his armor removed for the first time in months outside of his meditation chamber. Medical droids worked with frantic precision, fusing synthetic flesh to his charred shoulder and recalibrating the cybernetics in his chest. Vader did not sleep. He did not feel pain in the way ordinary men did. He stared at the ceiling, his mind replaying the duel. He had fought Jedi Masters. He had fought giant beasts on savage worlds. He had fought the rebellion's heroes. But he had never fought something that denied his power so completely. The giant in black armor had not used the Force. He had not used trickery. He had simply hated. His hatred was so pure, so absolute, that it formed a psychic wall that the dark side struggled to breach. "Lord Vader," Admiral Valoris's voice came over the internal comms. The Admiral sounded aged, his arrogance stripped away like paint under a sandblaster. "We have regained partial control of the ship." "Report," Vader rasped, the medical droid lowering his mask back onto his face. The hiss of the pressurized seal was the only comfort he had. "The enemy vessel The Sword of Dorn? It escaped into the anomaly, Valorous explained. But before they left, they unleashed a digital plague. Our main computer cores are screaming, my lord. The droids describe it as scrap code. It is rewriting our operating systems into gibberish. Religious scripture mixed with binary. Vader sat up, the servos in his armor whining. And the boarders? Dead. Or gone. We found 22 of their bodies. We attempted to perform autopsies. There was a long pause. Speak, Admiral. Sir, they have 3 lungs. 2 hearts. Their blood coagulates instantly. Their rib cages are fused into a solid plate of bone. They are not human. They are biological weapons wrapped in skin. Valoris's voice trembled. And we found the inscriptions carved into the bulkheads where they breached. Vader stood up. He summoned his cape with a flick of his wrist. Show me. 10 minutes later, Vader stood in the ruined Corridor 42. The white pristine walls of the Imperial ship were gone. In their place, the Black Templars had used their combat knives and the heat of their weapons to carve massive, jagged letters into the metal. The hallway looked less like a spaceship and more like a crypt. The message was written in High Gothic, a language the Empire did not know, but the translation droids had deciphered it. The galaxy belongs to the Emperor. Death to the false Empire. We will return. Vader ran his gloved hand over the jagged metal. He felt the residual psychic energy clinging to the letters. It was cold. So incredibly cold. Admiral, Vader said. Purge the NAV computers. Dump the core memory. Burn every droid that connected to their network. But sir, that will leave us drifting for weeks. We will lose months of data. If we do not, Vader turned to face him, that scrap code will find a way to transmit our location. You saw what they did with a single ship. Imagine if they bring a fleet. Valorous swallowed hard. He looked at the devastation around him, the broken stormtroopers, the melted blast doors, the graffiti of a death cult carved into his beautiful ship. It shall be done, my lord. Vader walked away, his cape trailing through the dust of pulverized ceramite. He needed to contact the Emperor. For the first time, Palpatine needed to know that there was a threat in the universe that did not care about the Sith, did not fear the Death Star, and could not be bought or bargained with. The Empire was built on fear. But today the Empire had learned to be afraid. Imperial Palace, Coruscant, the Emperor's throne room. Emperor Sheev Palpatine sat on his throne, gazing out at the endless cityscape of Coruscant. The traffic lanes were rivers of light, a testament to his absolute control over the galaxy. He was the Phantom Menace. He was the Senate. He was the dark heart of the galaxy. But today the dark side offered him no comfort. The hologram of Darth Vader flickered in the center of the room. The connection was weak, transmitted through backup relays from the crippled executor. And you say, Palpatine's voice was a dry rattle, that this chaplain resisted your power? He did not resist it, Master, Vader replied, kneeling. He ignored it. His mind was a fortress of fanaticism. He called me a witch. To them the Force is not a gift. It is a sin. Palpatine's yellow eyes narrowed. He looked at the data pad Vader had transmitted. It contained the few scraps of data the Executor had managed to salvage from the Black Templars' cogitators before the Purge. It was a star map. But it was wrong. The stars were in different places. The galaxy was split in half by a massive, bleeding scar of purple energy, the Great Rift. And the scale, the sheer scale of their Imperium. 1,000,000 worlds. Trillions of souls fed into a meat grinder of eternal war. And at the center of it all, a beacon. A psychic sun that burned even across the multiverse. Palpatine closed his eyes and reached out with the Force. He tried to touch this beacon. Immediately he recoiled. His withered hands gripped the armrests of his throne so hard the metal groaned. He had expected a rival Sith. Or a Jedi. Instead he had touched a mind that was not a mind at all. It was a golden, screaming ocean of agony and power. It was a corpse on a throne of gold, sustaining a lighthouse that burned souls for fuel. It was an entity that made the dark side look like a candle next to a supernova. The anathema, Palpatine whispered, a word he did not know but suddenly understood. Master? Vader asked. Palpatine stood up, his frail facade vanishing. He looked genuinely disturbed. We are in danger, Lord Vader. Great danger. Palpatine walked to the window. This Imperium of Man is not a civilization. It is a cult of death on a galactic scale. They do not want conquest. They want extermination. They believe we are heretics. And they have the numbers to drown us in blood. The rift is closed, Vader said. The Executor is repairing. We can fortify the outer rim. Fortify? Palpatine let out a low, mirthless chuckle. You do not understand. You destroyed their body, Lord Vader, but you did not stop their signal. Palpatine pressed a button on his console. A holographic projection appeared, a recording from the final moments of the Sword of Dorn before it vanished. It wasn't a distress signal. It wasn't a call for help. It was a coordinate lock. Target acquired, Galaxy 7G designation, Terra Secundus. Threat level, Extremis. Requesting Indomitus Crusade Fleet. Authorization, Guilliman. Palpatine stared at the name. Guilliman. He didn't know who that was, but he felt the weight of the name in the Force. It felt like order. It felt like unyielding, bureaucratic, logistical inevitability. They are coming, Palpatine whispered. Not today. Maybe not for 100 years. Time flows differently in the void. But they marked us. The cliffhanger. Outer Rim Territory Planet, Jakku. Far away from the Executor, on the desert sands of a desolate planet near the anomaly's closing point, something slammed into the dunes. It was not a ship. It was a drop pod. It had been ejected from the Sword of Dorn seconds before the ship jumped. It stood smoking in the sand, black paint scorched, the white cross still visible. A scavenger, wrapped in rags, approached the object cautiously. He tapped the side of the metal with his staff. Scrap, the scavenger muttered. Good scrap. The side of the pod hissed. Explosive bolts blew the doors open, knocking the scavenger onto his back. From the darkness of the pod, nothing human emerged. Instead, a massive robotic sarcophagus stomped out on two reverse-jointed legs. It was a dreadnought. A walking tank containing the near-dead body of an ancient space marine hero, kept alive only to kill. The machine's sensors cycled. A blue light scanned the horizon, scanning the scavenger, scanning the stars. A loudspeaker on the dreadnought's chassis crackled to life. I have awakened, the machine boomed, shaking the sand. Cogitator report, location unknown. Mission status, pending. The dreadnought raised an assault cannon the size of a speeder bike. Protocol, purge. Prepare the way for the crusade. The scavenger screamed as the barrels began to spin. The great game had come to a galaxy far, far away. And in the grim darkness of the future, there is only war.